Welcome. I am a lay Shin Buddhist who nevertheless maintains an interest in the broader realm of Pure Land and Mahayana Buddhist teachings. My YouTube channel is called Akala Akala, that is A-C-A-L-A, A-C-A-L-A. In these podcasts, I make a non-scholarly, humble, and sometimes bumbling attempt to explore a particular topic or question related to the wonderful Buddha Dharma. I hope you find them to be of interest. With that said, let us begin. I have mentioned 2 or 3 times in these podcasts that when we Shin Buddhists say the Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, we say it in gratitude. So I want to focus a little more in depth on this notion of gratitude in this particular podcast. First, I want to make one point. In Shin Buddhism, saying the Nembutsu is not a practice per se. It is a non-practice, basically, in the sense that we're not saying it for any particular gain. We're not saying it to perfect ourselves or to further improve our character or our ability to manifest the qualities of, for example, the 6 paramitas, which are the perfections of the bodhisattva. This is a real paradox in many ways, because usually in any kind of a religion you expect that there will be practice. And in fact, actually, when I personally went through a Sarana affirmation ceremony at the Ikoji temple back in the day, my Buddhist name is Daigyo, which is great practice. And Shinran talks about the great practice being the Nembutsu, but what does he mean by this? What is a practice within Shin Buddhism? It is basically, as I understand it, the recitation of the Nembutsu to express gratitude. And of course, that gratitude is for the benefit that we have received as a function of Dharmakara's 18th vow, as expressed in the larger Sukhavati Sutra, where he basically commits himself to creating a pure land of bliss where beings who entrust in him can be reborn when they die. So, going back to Reverend Kenryu Tsuji's profession of faith, which I had previously referenced in my first 2 or 3 podcasts, in Article 6 of that profession of faith, he says, "We recite Namo Amida Butsu in gratitude for the great compassionate vow." And again, that's of course the 18th vow. And then he says, in terms of gratitude, "The 2 pillars upholding our spiritual lives are gratitude and repentance." And he mentions that he'll speak about the latter in another article, namely Article 8. But he goes on to say, "Namo Amida Butsu means I place my faith in Amida Buddha. This expression is known as the Nembutsu and is recited verbally in deep gratitude for Amida's compassion. It must be pointed out clearly that the recitation is not a petitionary prayer asking Amida for salvation." So that's such an important point. Neither is it a petitionary prayer asking for any particular material or other outcome here in this world, in this existence. But the nature of this gratitude is very far-reaching. So he goes on in Article 7 of his profession of faith to say, "We regard all things with profound thankfulness, and whether suffering or happiness comes to us, we are content in the realization that Amida's grace is always with us." In other words, whatever happens in our lives, once we experience that shinjin, or true entrusting, and feel confidence in the fact of what's going to happen to us when we die, that can't be taken away. There's nothing in terms of what we would do or not do that can nullify the assurance that we have of being grasped and never abandoned by Amida. The other thing here is that I want to indicate that, in my own opinion, this sense of gratitude or thankfulness is basically the fundamental sentiment that's associated with spirituality. And what I might suggest is that you check this out for yourself on an empirical basis. What is the feeling that you have in those times when you do feel the most connection, if you will, to a more spiritual life or a more spiritual level existence that goes perhaps beyond this material existence that we go about our daily business in the mundane world. So in an elaboration of this principle, Reverend Tsuji, he gives 3 paragraphs articulating his views on Thanksgiving, and I think here he focuses more on what the implications are for this attitude or sentiment in the context of our more mundane existence. He says, "When we bow our heads in humble gratitude for Amida's compassion, this gratitude opens our spiritual eyes to the countless blessings with which we are surrounded. It is said that even in a single scrap of paper lying in the hallway, Renyo Shonin was able to discern the labor and the toil of the many hands that produced this single sheet. Furthermore, just as his heart was moved by the light of Amida's compassion, so was everything in this world touched by that same sacred light." So just to reflect a little bit on this first paragraph, he's referring to Renyo Shonin, who was a descendant of Shinran, and Renyo was really the person who promulgated Shin Buddhism in a very systematic way through letters he wrote to various followers of Pure Land Buddhism. And in doing so, he helped clarify and crystallize really the essence of the belief system, the doctrine, if you will, associated with Pure Land Buddhism. And also the point being made here by Reverend Tsuji, which is very critical and very easy to fathom, is that everything we experience in the world is contributed by many, many people, both currently as well as historically. In this case, he's talking about that piece of paper. Think of all the things that are involved in resulting in the creation of a piece of paper, including the original invention of paper, which probably goes back to early China. But anyhow, anything we can think of, we really recognize, if we're in touch with this feeling of gratitude, as something that other people have contributed their efforts toward, and that it's not that we sort of are the creators of these things or particularly can take credit for them. One of the things I often think of in this regard is food at the grocery store. We are so blessed here in the Western world, or at least in the United States, that, if I want food, I can simply go to the grocery store. Well, what has contributed to that? And I'll just mention, for example, the farmers that grew the food, the truckers that brought it in. And there are a myriad number of people and circumstances, including living on this earth, that is conducive to growing food. So anyhow, I don't want to dwell on that too much. I'm going to go on to the second paragraph in Reverend Tsuji's Thanksgiving treatise. "Our lives seem to be so preoccupied by the concepts of duty and authority and rights. We say to ourselves, 'I have worked for this dime. It is my right to buy a cup of coffee. It is the duty of the owner of the coffee shop to give me good service. As a paying customer, I have the authority to demand good service for my money.' While we are thinking thus, we become blind to all the human, natural, and sacred powers that have and are contributing to the existence of this beverage for my enjoyment. When we look upon this cup, as did Renyo Shonin upon the sheet of paper, we cannot help but join our hands in gasho and utter the Japanese grace, itadaki masu, or I accept this thing in deep thanksgiving." Of course, if we go to Starbucks now, we're not going to get a cup of coffee for a dime, but you get the idea. And here he uses the term gasho, which is the Japanese term for putting one's hands together and bowing, which is a very respectful, humble kind of gesture. As far as the Japanese phrase itadaki masu, I'm not familiar with it, but we take it from him as meaning I accept this in deep thanksgiving. So whether you use that or not, or just simply the gesture of gasho, the point is the sentiment, the feeling that you have, the feeling that we have as we recognize the tremendous contributions that people have made to whatever it is we're the benefit of. And of course, that then relates also to the great interdependence that exists as a fundamental reality that we many times are not sensitized to as we go about our daily business. So now going to the third paragraph. "Indeed, it is the thankful heart for Amida's compassion around which our lives revolve. In the long journey through life, we meet innumerable events that throw us into the depths of despair, and incidents that transport us to the heights of joy. But the realization of Amida's grace makes us face life's sorrows with courageous resignation and accept happiness and success with humility. When Shinran Shonin was sentenced to exile from Kyoto, he did not stand at the outskirts of the city shaking his fists at the authorities who were subjecting him to hardships and humiliations. Instead, through the power of the Nembutsu, he transformed his misfortune into good fortune and rejoiced at the opportunity of being able to talk about Amida with folks who lived in the outlying districts. Well, this attitude of Shinran in that particular circumstance, when he, because of his Pure Land Buddhist beliefs, was shunned by the authorities who were, I think, more in line with the more traditional kinds of sects or schools within Buddhism. This attitude and reaction that Shinran had really is saint-like. I mentioned in a previous podcast that he was basically a saint, and I don't necessarily have that as an expectation of myself, and nor is it probably reasonable for most of us to have that expectation. And an argument can be made, putting on my retired psychologist hat again, is that, there can be benefit in what we might refer to as appropriate assertiveness. In other words, I don't personally think that we necessarily should be passive in the context of circumstances that if we were assertive, we could alter them in the direction of what we might judge to be a more fair or just kind of outcome. But again, from a spiritual perspective, this attitude that's being described by Reverend Suji is really a representation of an aspirational ideal that is worth reflecting upon, even if in a given circumstance we don't elect to manifest it in our reaction at that particular time with that particular circumstance. So, in the context of expressing perhaps gratitude for the opportunity, frankly, that I have in doing these podcasts, I'll simply manifest my namesake, Daigyo, the great practice, and close with Namo Amida Butsu. With that, I will sign off by reciting the Nembutsu in gratitude for being embraced and accepted just as I am by Amida Buddha, never, never to be abandoned. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu.